Wonderful. Welcome to today's Cross Canada Superstudio Talk. My name is Matthew Souls. I'm one of the co-organizers of Architects Against Housing Alienation. I'm speaking to you today from the traditional and unceded territories of the Coast Salish peoples, including the Squamish, Musqueam, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. Um, Today's talk is by two wonderful and exciting architects who are collaborators of AHA, part of the AHA effort, and we were very excited to work with them, among other things, on the Venice Biennale effort. Um, and they are the co-founders of Haeccity Studio Architecture, based here in British Columbia. And it is Shirley Shen and Travis Hanks, and they're going to present a talk today titled, as you can see on the screen, Collective Typologies for Anti-Speculative Housing. A very provocative and exciting title. So please, Travis and Shirley, take it away. Thanks so much for joining us.
Great. Thank you, Matthew, for that introduction. I'm Travis.
I'm
I'm
Shirley.
I'm the principal at Haeccity Studio Architecture, and Shirley is my partner.
And we are calling in from the traditional unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, Tsleil-Waututh, and Cowichan First Nations. Thank you so much for having us today. For those who don't know our company, it is called Haeccity Studio. The name of our practice comes from the term haeccity. It's a philosophical term meaning the discrete and defining characteristics of a thing, which is just an annoying way of saying that we have our projects respond to its specific site, um, which is another fancy way of saying context. We will be going through a brief history of our practice today as a way of explaining how we got into the space of anti-speculative housing design.
So we're going through a couple different kinds of contexts, I guess, that we work within and have started to frame our practice. The first and maybe the most obvious is the physical context, and this is what you might think about as site constraints. So we like to go back to this project. It is an older project. We started this back in 2014. But it really was the start of our missing middle research and a lot of work that we've done around housing in the Vancouver area and beyond. So this is a site in downtown Vancouver in the West End, very dense, walkable neighborhood. But as you can see, this entire block is made up of historic Edwardian houses from the turn of the last century. These were all saved. Many of them are part of have been combined into a large social housing project that was done in the 80s and 90s to both rescue the houses, upgrade them, but also create a nice bit of housing in the area. Our particular site used to have one such Edwardian house on it, but it burned down in 1927. So it was this kind of empty leftover site, it had a little post-war bungalow on it for a while that was quite run down. And it was owned by and attached to, in a kind of weird legal settlement, going back to the fire, to the larger seven-story building that you see there to the right. So that really sets the kind of constraints of this site. You have this large seven-story building with a zero lot line right up to the property line on one side. You have a partial zero lot line encroachment with a stair that was added on to the Edwardian house on the other side. So very constrained on both sides. We have a large and endangered cypress tree right in the middle of the site that we can't change the grade around. So we're working with the grade and that constraint, as well as another mature tree in the front yard of the neighbor. Otherwise, it's a standard sized Vancouver lot, 33 feet wide by 120 deep with a lane in the rear. And so this was a really interesting testing ground to see if we could do something that at the time was really unheard of, which is to put a sixplex on one of these single lots. This was before R1. This was before SMA or SMU. This was before the missing middle conversation really took off. But it was very much already in, the kind of housing crisis that Vancouver has been in for quite some time in terms of availability and affordability. So we were really pushing the limits here of what we could squeeze onto this site and still create a livable, community-focused kind of project. So this is a view of that kind of central courtyard, looking to the tree from on top of the green roof. Um, and this is a view from the lane. Uh, and what we really did in terms of addressing those physical constraints is we pushed the base of our building right up tight to the 7-story. It didn't have any windows on the ground floor, so we could do a zero lot line with a firewall. But we had to maintain a 2-meter walkway on the other side for fire department to be able to get to the rear units. So if we had taken the building straight up from that point, the upper volume would not have been wide enough to accommodate layouts for units. So we have this, the entire top mass kind of moves away, slides away from the large 7-story building to create an oversized setback from those windows, and creates this cantilever over that fire department path so that we can have the kind of full volume up there. I'll just go back to this view again so you can kind of see how that slides over. There's a courtyard around that mature tree, which allows additional entrances, but also more windows. And there's another raised courtyard with a roof top patio in the rear massing of the building, again, allowing for more windows, more light and views to come in to those units. So all those units are quite livable. They're not, kind of boxes with one window on one end. And then this is a view from that neighboring 7-story building looking down on it. And we really like to talk about this view quite a bit. One, because it really, underscores that physical context, the proximity to the high density of the downtown, but also this kind of really walkable, livable, human-scaled neighborhood that's in the middle of that, and kind of bridging those two contexts, bridging the very tall building on one side and the low building on the other side. And also starting to tease at some of the roadblocks and hangups that have emerged as multiplexes have started to come about. A big one is privacy and overlook. And so, these small single family houses historically have really prioritized privacy and not being able to see your neighbors. And this view kind of challenges that and says, hey, if we're making communities that are battling loneliness and are rich in social diversity and connection, you need to be able to see your neighbors. You need to be able to run into them. And so making a project that stylistically does not look like the rest of Mole Hill, but in a lot of ways can function like the best parts of it with multiple entrances, lots of paths and plantings and opportunities for people to connect with one another. And I'll just end on this. This is some kind of metrics about the project, which was important as the project was finishing, because this is when the conversation was just starting about a new zone, what ultimately became the R1 zone, a multiplex zone in Vancouver. They were starting to do research. We did workshops with the city. The city came and toured this project. So it really did act as a precedent to what could be done on these single family lots beyond just a single family residence.
So when the project was finished, and actually even before the project was open to the public to rent, our own employees were in conversation with the owner of that rental property, trying to get housing for ourselves. And by the time the project had been built, the rental rates had gone up so far that even our sort of middle income, gainfully employed staff could not live in the very project that we designed. And this was extremely frustrating, and it was a wake-up call for us because we were really excited to be working on dedicated rental. Not many of these opportunities had come up. The market was so focused on condos at the time. So we really had to reflect on how we were going to contribute to this, to the housing affordability issue as an architectural practice. Like, are we only about design, and can we only work within, the construction cost and moving, massing around on a site, or can we look at the bigger picture, the macroeconomic context? So this is exactly when the Missing Middle competition was released by the Urbanarium. And in reading the brief, we realized that was exactly the typology that the Comox project, the Mole Hill project, fell under. We just didn't really know what this term had meant. And so we took this opportunity to reflect and do some research about how we wanted to design housing going forward. The interesting thing about the brief to us was that it wasn't just about aesthetics and form. It was about performa as much as any of that other stuff. And so the brief asked us to prove how how our proposal would be affordable. Affordable meaning the definition by CMHC that 30% of a household's income is spent on housing. We drew by lottery a site in Burnaby. Burnaby is a suburb very close to Vancouver, and the lot sizes are almost identical and the configuration almost exactly the same as the Comox project. And so we were able to kind of like relay that built experience um, and focus more on the financial mechanisms and the tenure mechanisms that we thought were probably more important when it comes to determining whether a project is affordable or not. So you can see in this sort of chart, we're comparing what a single family project, a gently densified project with a secondary suite and laneway would look like, and then going up to these multiplexes that contain up to 8 units on a site. And for Burnaby's context at land prices at that time, it sort of broke even at around 7 units. Each household, assuming they had median income, could spend 32% of their monthly, income on housing. And what was critical about this was that the project had to have access to financing that was made for dedicated rental or cooperative projects. And so this would be through CMHC and would be amortized over 50 years or more instead of the traditional 25 years. And it would be a lower interest rate as well. And the reason we landed on co-ops was because we did a scan. Like at this time, our staff were actively looking for housing. And when they did a scan of what was affordable out there, it was the co-ops that had been built in the 70s, 80s, and 90s by through CMHC funding on land that was provided by the city. And somehow the inflation and rental costs for those projects stayed relatively proportional to incomes versus the market rental and the market condos that were available. So this is a graphic sort of envisioning how 7 households of various family makeup and income levels could pool their resources together, each spending about 30% of their income to overcome this developmental hurdle, which would get converted into a large mortgage, right, at the end of the project. And also importantly, we're considering transportation costs because, if you're living out in the suburbs in a predominantly residential neighborhood, you still have that cost of commuting into city center where most of the jobs are. Now, of course, it being a urbanarium competition, we also have to come up with something to do with policy and landing this architecture on site. And so we took the Comox project and simplified it and made it into a zoning envelope. So what we're saying is that it's not about what it looks like, it's about how it lands and how the massing differs from what traditional single family neighborhoods have been, which is really concentrating, massing in the center of the site and having these sort of formal front yards that aren't really used and backyards that are more lived in, but not really as sociable or contributing to livability as it could. So this has that 2 meter fire access. It has zero lot line on the other side. And it's a 3 story building that sort of tapers off towards the top to allow more light into the site. This is how we envisioned these micro ops fitting into these neighborhoods. And we even went to the degree of like redesigning the streets, to account for the extra parking that would be required. We also had this idea of reintroducing live work zoning so that people could maybe reduce their transportation costs and having to commute, but also have that secondary source of income. And I think a lot of times we talk about the housing cost component of the affordability equation, but we don't talk about the income, which is what this is pegged to, right? So if we're allowing people to spend, to be able to earn more income from where they live, then that also has an impact on affordability. So we ended up winning this competition, and it kind of like thrust us into now being in conversation with municipalities, presenting to councils, and advocating, which was a role that we never had before, but advocating for policy change to sort of open up more possibilities around missing middle housing.
So if that first project, the competition, was a kind of foray into the things that lie outside of the traditional bounds of what the architect does, i.e., financial regulations and legal constraints and policy, then this next iteration was bringing it back to what are the communities that we're building? What are the effects on the people that could live in these places? And so that's tying the economic aspect to the social aspect. And this was the springboard for our work with AHA towards the Venice Biennale. So, as Shirley mentioned in that competition, we had this idea of the micro op, so taking a kind of a co-op typology, which is typically for a very large social housing project, and try to downsize it to a single lot to make it more accessible potentially to smaller groups of people, demystify it to a certain extent. And so we wanted to take that a little bit further and really get into the weeds about all of these kind of collective typologies or co-typologies. And we started by making just a glossary of co. So co-housing, for example, we looked at a lot of projects that use this where you have a working group of people that are essentially the future residents, which are getting together to act as developer, which is a really fascinating model and makes for spaces that are highly livable and makes for a great community cohesion. But it hasn't historically resulted in a lot of affordability. And in fact, those projects are often very expensive to live in. Um, Co-living is another one that we looked at, and this again goes back to the COMOX project. You know, a lot of those units were designed to be family units, but because their market rent ended up being so high, what you actually saw were young professionals that were ganging together and living in one multi-bedroom unit as a kind of untraditional family, if you will. So we were interested in exploring that and pushing against regulations because there are actually by law limitations to how many people can live in a unit that are not related. So how do we start to identify these roadblocks and find kind of innovation in project delivery and in tenure? Similar for co-ops, we talked about that a little bit already. How do we kind of rethink the big kind of government-led co-op projects that tend to have a lot of strings attached and are really difficult to deliver as a project. They put a lot of pressure on that delivery process, but they create a good model at the end of the day for the residents. But how can we, cut that down and streamline it? For co-design, and this is tied a little bit to co-housing. A lot of times, the residents, future residents there are participating in the design and working closely with the designers to make sure that the components that are important to livability to them specifically are included in the project from the beginning, rather than a developer model, which is really just responding to market metrics, delivers, a product at the end of the day, and you're kind of, you just have to live with what product the market will bear. So the idea for Venice was to take all of these co-models and try to combine them in a way, take the best aspects of different ones, try to remove, kind of carve out the negative aspects, and see if we could find something that really created innovation in the project delivery model. So again, not just the design, trying to step out of just what the architect role traditionally has been in terms of delivering design, and expand into some of these other areas of project delivery, tenure, financial frameworks, etc. So this is the Kokomo project that we did for Venice, where we're taking the co-op tenure, downsizing it, having aspects of co-living, co-design, co-housing, even co-working, all in one kind of village-like project. And the way we went around designing that, we had a site that we were looking at, a real site in Richmond, which is an ethnoburb just outside of Vancouver. As an ethnoburb, it has really high diversity in its population, wide range of backgrounds, a high immigrant population. And so we wanted to create a set of personas, and we started with doing this even in the Urbanarium competition. But we took it a little bit further and made a set of personas that matched that demographic of the overall Richmond population, to see if we could create a community that really represented that larger kind of area and region. And then we had each of the designers on the team take on one of those personalities, and a sort of exercise of deep empathy, sort of imagine what the important aspects would be to that person, and advocate on their behalf. And so the design process was channeled through these personas, where we're all kind of co-designing through this sort of alter ego or this avatar. And what we landed on is this kind of village model. This is quite a large lot, an agrarian lot, which in Richmond would traditionally have been kind of a farmhouse with a large green area on it. Increasingly, it has become a suburban area with lots of housing, dedicated residential area, so not a lot of other services. And is now, even though it's a greenfield site, is actually officially in the city center of Richmond's OCP, or official community plan. So it has the capacity to actually have quite high density there now. But also looking at how we could start to work in the village aspects of a complete community. So having even some mixed use, some co-working opportunities. Work from home was really kind of taking off as kind of a more prominent way of working. And so having those facilities as part of this. So you can see in these boards as they go across, there's seniors housing. So we have multi-generational kind of housing on site, where the elders can help with childcare, to take pressure off parents and bring household expenditures down. We have gardens, community gardens, which can help with food security. We have shared amenities and cooking areas. So a place where people can really get together and have community meals in a kind of a central location, and know their neighbors. And a couple different kinds of housing, including co-housing. and co-living and co-working spaces. And even there's a little cafe here. Um, so really trying to create a diversity of housing offerings, but also other programs in this single site. And we sort of ended in the kind of spirit of AHA and the exhibit in Venice. We created these large posters that, have this kind of propaganda component to them of kind of promoting this utopian vision of what housing can be if you start to strip it away from maximizing return on investment and strip it away from the kind of privacy focused priority for separating people into their own separate boxes and really try to create more of a collective vision of housing and community. And so this is our kind of banner image here. But thankfully it didn't end there, and the kudos to the AHA folks who kept pushing us after the final deliverables. Asking what's next, what's happening, how is this progressing, and so it kept going.
So we formed a real life working group, friends and people who were connected to us through Kathy McGranera, who is a co-housing consultant, and she collaborated with us on the Venice project. So she was getting calls from people who were looking for this type of housing in Vancouver. And so we said, hey, we have a site, it's undeveloped. Do you want to join us and brainstorm on what it could actually look like? And so this working group got together. We went on field trips. We visited almost every single co-housing project that we could access by car. We even went down to Seattle. This is a photo at the Capitol Hill project done by Schemata Architects. And we really bonded over the vision of being able to live in community. Yeah, and then so we sketched out how a legal and financial framework might look like. And at that time, Capitol Hill Co-op was kind of going through a phase where they had to refinance and people were trying to exit it, and it was kind of messy. Like it hadn't been because it was a pilot, right? No one had really done that before. No one really knew how to exit such a framework. And so we also figured that out for ourselves. We also had the benefit of being connected through the CMHC Accelerator Fund to community funding out in Nova Scotia. So there's another project that was taking off there, and they kind of were mentors to us. But their model was different. Theirs was a official cooperative, but we felt that in BC, co-ops just had too many strings attached, and we wanted to simplify it for our community, or this idea of the community. So this is an aerial of the site in Richmond. Like I said, it's already been built out to missing middle, and so the form wasn't something we were really too worried about. And we didn't even need it to be like the focus. For us, it was about how do we pick at this tenure and financing issue. So the red site is actually where we're calling from today. It's a single family house, right? Very odd thing to be situated amongst this density. And then the rear half has been undeveloped ever since the farming days. And then this is the site plan of that rear half. So part of the lot will go towards a land road dedication to complete a new road. And then there's sort of a street facing mass that will kind of be the face of the project. And then in the center of the site is this co-housing project that we're working on. So it's got a courtyard, it's got sort of the common house amenities that you find in co-housing projects. It has a shared guest suite. So one of the things we heard a lot from the co-working group was that they would love to have a 3 bedroom unit for the times where their family is visiting or just in case, you know. But it was really out of reach in Vancouver to have a 3 bedroom. Even a 2 bedroom was quite a stretch. And so we built in this guest suite so that people could share that extra capacity. These are early massing models. They're not beautiful, but it shows you sort of our approach to how we're landing that density on the site. And we're not maximizing FSR, but we are maximizing the potential for sociability on the site. So creating open spaces where the corridors that lead to suite entrances can look out over it, and those walkways are open and bigger than they need to be and have even more spill out room for living in view of your neighbors so that you have more chances of interaction. Um, More safe spaces for kids to play in, to be monitored by elders that aren't necessarily in their direct family, right? So intergenerational living for us is just about the community mix. It doesn't necessarily mean you're living with your very own grandparents. And that's something that we learned from visiting other co-housing projects. This is just what AI gave us. And when we asked it to make our project fit in with the neighborhood context, this is probably not what it's going to look like in the end. But, you know, part of it is the optics. There is kind of a bias or stigma around anything that is not stratified and owned by the owners, right? So we're dealing with that through architectural expression in a way.
I think the prompt might have included a modern farmhouse for this one, but it very much kind of falls into a mullet typology. So, you know, kind of status quo up front, you know, and then party in the back is kind of what we're going for here.
And so our rezoning application is in, and we are very certain about how the architecture and the code and all that stuff will play out. It's even prefabrication and mass timber ready, so we have a good handle on that. What what the project really is about though is the legal aspects, the fine print. And so we're in negotiations right now. The city sees dedicated rental as one thing only. They have a template, and that template will not allow what we want to do, which is the collective ownership. So that part is forthcoming to be determined.
And I'm just going to skip back to that because I love, you know, this term at the top, the terms of instrument. And so we're very much, you know, learning to play a new instrument here and trying to find some creativity within a framework which is meant not to allow it. So I'm just taking a look at the time here. We have a little bit more that we could touch on, some kind of current things. I think you know, that start to get into permitting and processing a little bit. But I could, Matthew, if you think there are a lot of questions or want more time for discussion, we could also pause it here.
Um, this is so great so far. We definitely want to wrap up at 11 Pacific time. So I think if you want to, I think you could go for another 5 to 8 minutes or so.
Great. That sounds great. Yeah,
Or
we'll keep
like
going for
5 minutes, 5 minutes.
5 minutes.
Yeah,
That sounds good. Yeah, that's perfect.
great.
So, I think, you know, if we think about the kind of trajectory of these projects and the string that kind of runs through them, you know, we're really interested in having a practice that is informed both by real world constraints and by kind of theoretical aspirations. And so, we love that the missing middle kind of practice really started with an actual project, the Comox project, which then informed the research. So in a weird way, the built form came before that research. But then we took that research further in Venice, and then the theoretical starts to inform the practice in realizing that project. So trying to continuously have that back and forth, we think is incredibly important. And we have continued to build. We're not showing a lot of physical projects today, but there are other housing projects that have been completed. And another kind of bridging of those two worlds that is just launching now is a standardized design collaboration with the city of Kelowna. So standardized designs have started to emerge over the last few years as an increasingly important conversation around permitting times and processing times. And so there's been a lot of feedback from the design community and developers, builders, that one major roadblock to delivering more housing faster is how long it takes to process permits. And to get the shovels in the ground. And so we've been talking a lot to municipalities about that. The province has come down with some new bills to kind of push open some doors for municipalities to get housing starts going faster. And the kind of idea of the Vancouver Special has come up quite a lot. So the Vancouver Special was sort of a standardized design going back to the 70s, where you could take a standard plan to City Hall and almost immediately get a building permit to build one of these. And so they're all over Vancouver. They were very accessible, easy to build, easy to convert and modify. So you have some very nice ones and some really not so nice ones. But they were kind of very democratic in that way. And so there's been a lot of interest in creating libraries of designs that people could easily access and build quickly. And I will say with some mixed success. There's a lot more pressures on buildings now than there were in the 70s. Performance standards, design guidelines. Uh, uh, we're now talking about putting more density on lots. So there's constraints with services and infrastructure and parking, et cetera. So there is a lot of pressure on these projects, which makes them harder to standardize. But we have Kelowna, I think, is a little bit ahead of the game in that they actually did a collaboration. They didn't just ask for designs that were already done, but actually worked with us to create new designs specific to their context, which were vetted to ensure that they met all of the constraints and were actually permit ready. And that meant really getting into the weeds, in terms of the engineering and um, trying to streamline these so that they could be built with the lowest sort of investment in time and extra costs and create the easiest pathway to delivery.
So in a way, it's taking the speculation out away from the developer, right? Developers didn't have to guess how long a permit would take and didn't have to guess if trying something a little bit different would cost them and ultimately lead nowhere with the municipality, which we have seen again and again. So this is just another tool out there for the developer community. So yeah, I think that is the pretty much the end of our presentation. Happy to answer any questions.
Thank you, Travis and Shirley. That was so stimulating, so provocative. Great work.
Uh,
So, yeah, please go ahead and ask questions. People are here.
hey, Travis and Shirley, thank you for the talk. This is Tony.
Hey, Tony.
I'm really curious about where you ended here, because our office has been also dabbling in these standardized designs and questioning the whether or not it benefits the profession or does anything demonstrably to help the housing crisis, et cetera. But what's really interesting between the last two projects you showed here is that the work that you've been doing with the potential co-op group on the parcel in Richmond really involves quite a lot of care and a real relationship with you as the architects in order to create something that's really co-designed and quite catered to the site and to this specific group of needs or specific group's needs. And the standardized designs are really the opposite. They're completely not site specific and designed to expedite delivery of housing for private development. So the disconnect between the two is interesting. And I'm curious, since you have your heads in both places, do you see any potential for overlap, or will the co-op model be forever kind of bound to the level of custom design that we're used to as typical in an architectural project?
Yeah, thanks, Tony. That, as always, that's a really great and probing question. So yeah, I think there is a split in different approaches here, and I would say the standardized design falls on what we call supply side approach, and it goes to a fundamental logic that if we just build more housing faster, then the prices will go down naturally, and it's a market-based approach, a supply side kind of approach, which we fundamentally don't think will get us to affordability alone, and certainly won't get us to higher quality of life. So I think that it is an interesting juxtaposition that the AHA was really kind of trying to see what we could do completely outside of a market equation. And then the standardized designs is really saying, okay, what can we do like totally inside of the market constraints, right? How can we make that happen? Because um, that is going to happen with or without architects, and we've seen a lot of the standardized designs moving towards residential designers and kind of staying at that 4 units per lot, which means you don't legally require an architect. And so it delivers a lot of times a lower quality product, and can cut corners and things. So we're interested in exploring both and trying to maintain it all as part of the conversation.
I will also just add, we were very pro-citizen developers a couple of years ago, but after the Burnaby standardized designs came out, and we started to have conversations with people interested in doing self-development, we could quickly realize that they just didn't have the capacity to follow through. They didn't have the time, they didn't have the expertise, they couldn't put together the financing. And even if it was like, multiple generations pooling their resources, they couldn't agree on a direction. And it just kind of got nowhere. And then we realized when we started doing the Hemlock project, our own project, acting kind of like the developer, how difficult it was. And so we started to empathize with the development community and started to swing the other way and like, okay, if these are actually the people that will be building the housing, how can we help them do it faster and better?
Cool, thank you.
I have a question just about the Hemlock project in Richmond. So the mullet description, I guess I just want to know more. It's such a fascinating project. The 2 units at the front, what is their tenure? Like when you say the parties at the center, so are those like two, it's like a duplex or strata or, and I'm, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah. So the tenure is meant to be rental, kind of on the face of it for all of them.
okay,
But
okay.
I think even going back to the initial Comox project, we started playing with the courtyard model. That was the genesis of it. And by splitting a mass in half, you kind of double the exposure to light and views for the units inside. And so it's a great way to increase livability when you are adding a lot more units into it. So you've seen a lot of courtyard models today, and it is something that we continuously come back to as a way to balance more units with livability. And so you see that a little bit in the Comox model as well, where we have this kind of street-facing mass that looks like a townhouse. If you look at the this image of
Um,
the
I'm not sharing.
we're not sharing, but
Hold on.
if we can pull this up, the image of the overall neighborhood, it's predominantly townhouses. And so in terms of the like fitting in the neighborhood, which is always something that we run up against, in permitting and working with cities, the front massing is meant to look like townhouses, even though that is not the tenure of it. And so it's kind of a meeting halfway of fitting in the neighborhood, but delivering something that works differently, operates differently.
Great, thanks. And then a follow-up to that question. So you said you decided to not pursue it through a co-op tenure because of all this kind of strings attached. And so you're pursuing it as a rental model. But is there something about the rental structure and the ownership of the rental property that you're doing different from, let's say, a standard developer-driven project? And I'd just like to hear more about that. And I don't mean that as a leading question that you should be doing something different. I just because you mentioned that there in
Yeah,
the rezoning, there's some things that are kind of challenges and obstacles. So I'm just curious about how
very
you're putting
topical.
this together.
Yeah.
Sure. Um, our idea was that there would be a housing operator, kind of like a co-op operator, and that operator would be formed by members of the community, right? So you're buying into this operation or the overall holding company,
Mm,
and then you're just
hmm.
renting. There's an agreement under that where you're renting your unit, similar to a co-op. But co-ops in BC have to be a nonprofit. They have to, and nonprofits come with so many strings, um, including reporting and extra kind of like legal things that have to happen. And we couldn't go there. Also, um, Richmond specifically kind of like sees market condos as one stream, and you have to pay CACs with that, and then market rental as another stream. You don't have to do CACs, and then you get all these relaxations for going this route. And then anything else that is like affordable housing actually, ironically, has more strings attached. It needs a higher level of scrutiny to fit under affordable housing. And so this was sort of like the path of least resistance. And so we started going down this way. We're not entirely sure where it's going to land, if we can really achieve this hybrid model that we want. Currently, it looks like maybe rent to own might be an option, but we want to still try to tweak it. We don't want to take something that's already been done, because then all this research would be kind of like wasted in a way. So, yeah, I don't know if that answers your question or not.
No, no, it really answers your question. Answers the question. Thanks so much. So, to your knowledge, has is this ownership structure being done in BC before?
It
No,
hasn't.
it's it would be first. So it's
Yeah.
kind of, and do you know if it's done elsewhere in Canada?
Um, it has been done under a co-op nonprofit. In terms of like the housing agreement and the work,
Sure,
yeah, but not
yeah,
as not
but
in the way
not
that
as
we
a
do.
legally a for-profit
Exactly.
holding entity. Got it. Yeah.
Yeah, so there's certain
Wow,
components that
exciting.
we're taking from other precedents, but we are
Yeah.
really trying to innovate in that legal structure. And
Hmm.
so when I say it's rental on the face of it, there is even in a standard rental structure, there's rental agreements with an owner. Someone owns the property. It's usually a
Hmm.
company and an operator. And so we're really looking at the owner and operator and the rental agreements as the mechanism to change that the tenure relationship.
So interesting. And then there'll be a last question about this, but how do you do this aspect of the work? Do you have a tight relationship with a lawyer that you collaborate with closely on this, or are you sort of figuring it out yourself
We have
primarily?
a lawyer that so no one's done it yet. So our best Lead right now is a lawyer who has previously done co-ownership but stratified projects. And so they're going to be innovating on their end. And so yeah, we'll see how it goes.
Sounds like you have to have the right lawyer who's up
Yeah.
for an adventure.
Yes.
Yes, we've gone through a few already.
Right.
Matthew, thank you so much. I have to run to another meeting. Shirley can stay around for a few more minutes if there are more questions, but really appreciate the opportunity to chat with you here. Bye for
Thanks so
now.
much, Travis. Take care. So please, anyone, no such thing as a silly question. We'd love to hear from you if you have anything you'd like to ask, and you can just write it out in the chat if that feels better, or turn your microphone off and share it with us.
Hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, we're the BCIT architecture students that are currently undertaking a studio project within an urban site. And our question to you is there any kind of magic trick that you necessarily use to create privatized space within these communal buildings where the unit itself is more noise isolated than it otherwise would? Or would you just simply rely on building codes or an acoustical engineer?
So prioritizing privacy versus sociability, is that the question?
Privatizing like a unit space in terms of noise isolation, for example.
Okay, that's reason. Yeah. Okay, so one thing people hate is having neighbors above and beside them, right? And I think above is probably worse than beside in some situations, depending on if it's wood frame or concrete. So that's one thing, whether you're stacking or not. Um, where certain spaces within your unit is next to another demising wall spaces. So if you have two bedrooms, facing each other, great. They're probably going to be kind of like um, compatible. But if you have like a noisy, deck or outdoor space next to a quiet space, then that probably won't work very well. There's always going to be some issue that comes up. And so you kind of just have to, um, I don't know, do your best to mitigate those potential conflicts. Yeah, I don't know if that's helpful.
Oh, that's all right. That was quite helpful. Thank you.
Great question. Thank you.
Hi there. My name is Pip. I am at the Toad office here with Tony. Um, I know that recently Burnaby has kind of put in more restrictions for their multiplex rules, and I was wondering what your thoughts were on kind of scaling back on what they originally came up with of like, 4 stories, no FSR and whatnot, and if you have any suggestions or ideas that would aid Burnaby kind of in this conflict.
Yeah. Thank you. It's a really good question. I think when the first iteration came out, we were all like applauding. Oh my God, no FSR. That's great. That's what we've been advocating for all along. No parking requirements and really opening that buildable envelope. Um, Unfortunately, what happened, was like people just took that mass and then just built a box, and then there's these photos out there where the building hasn't been completed, it's still just plywood. None of the sort of like expression has really been constructed yet, and like these photos of that next to a single family bungalow really shifted public perception and kind of had council kind of flip their um, stance on things and just like sort of pump the brakes on that, right? So now going down to like 2 stories in the back, if you have two principal buildings, and lowering it to 3 stories. Um, the 3 story thing kind of, I think, should have been flagged in the first round because they were trying to keep it within part 9, so wood frame construction, non-sprinklered, etc. And that 4th story just kind of confused everyone. It wasn't really attainable. So I think that was something that they realized and remedied in the second round. Um, Ultimately, I think this is what the neighborhoods and people are more comfortable with. So while it's not maybe the density that we want to see, because really sixplexes aren't really going to get built, I think we're going to see more like fourplexes with unofficial secondary suites. Um, Still, I think the fact that they reacted in a year after the first round that came out, they tweaked it. And it's actually pretty similar to Vancouver's R1 right now. So it's kind of like, I think where it's going to land. That's the medium. So yeah.
Great, thank you.
We have time for one last question if anyone would like to offer it. Okay, I think we should wrap it up. I know everybody has busy schedules. Shirley, thanks so much. That was a really informative talk. Fantastic to see the evolution of this aspect of your practice's work. Very, very inspiring and such important work that you're doing. So thanks for doing it and thanks for sharing it. And thanks everyone for joining us today. I'd also just like to say that BCIT facilitated this talk by reaching out to Travis and Shirley. Of course, AHA is longtime supporters of Travis and Shirley, so we were immediately like, "Oh, awesome that they're going to participate in Superstudio Talks." So thank you, Tony, and thank you, BCIT. Just want to remind everybody that we have our next Superstudio Talk is in 2 weeks on February 26th. It will be at 12:15 p.m. Pacific time, and the speaker is Cheryl Garadi from OCAD in Toronto. So please join us for that, and have a great day. Take
Thank you,
care.
everyone. Thank you so much for having me. And good luck on your studios.